Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone. Today our topic is vSphere networking, and we are going to cover both standard switches and distributed switches. I know for some of the students or the audience, maybe this uh, name is a new name, or maybe they are not familiar with the virtualization. So let me give you a brief introduction of the today's agenda. We are going to cover these topics today. It is going to be almost 2 hour session, right? So you are going to stay with me, but in between, if you need a break of 5 minutes, we can have a break and we can have a chit chat discussion during the break. So first, we are going to give you a high level overview of virtualization, and we will talk about VMware vSphere. Then we will discuss the overview of networking. Like usually you guys are familiar. I think my voice is Mashal, are you not able to hear me? Maybe Mashal audio is not connected. Uh, Please connect your audio. Okay. Suresh and Mashal audio is not connected. So uh, can you guys tell me how many of you are familiar with networking, or have you done any course like CCNA? Can you just post it in the chat so that we have the idea how many of you? So we have Umair Siddiqui. Okay. Okay. Majority of I can see students from who has a background of networking. So that's good. Okay. Perfect. Then we are going to discuss the introduction to virtual switches. And we have two types of virtual switches. One is called vSphere standard switch, and the other one is called vSphere distributed switch. So I prepared these slides very sample so that you guys can learn from today's session, right? And I have also included two labs. Uh, One is for vSphere standard switches, and the other lab will cover the topics related to vSphere distributed switch. Uh, at the end of the session, we can have a question and answer session. But even if you have a question between the lecture, you can always raise your hand, or you can just post your question in the chat, or even you can unmute yourself and you can stop me and you can ask me question. So this is regarding the agenda of today's session. And this is about me. My name is Kashif Ali, and I'm basically the Insight Solution Architect for VMware technology at one of the US-based IT company. Uh, Today's session is a series of my VMware vExpert activities. So I have been awarded by VMware for in 2021, then 2022, and 2023. And because of your support, inshallah, I'm going to submit another application for VMware vExpert 2024. So hopefully, I will be getting that recognition again from VMware. And I have done a couple of certifications, uh, but specifically my expertise and my interest is more of the VMware technologies. So I'm the VMware Certified Master Specialist for Digital Workspace One, which is the MDM solution from VMware side. I have done uh, three VMware certified professional level certifications, and I'm also a research committee member here in Peshawar, and I'm also doing my PhD in computer sciences. And on the right side, you can see some of my other activities. So that is about me. I wish I could also give you a chance to introduce yourself, but because of the time, I will move to the topic. So, data center physical infrastructure. Normally, every one of you would be familiar and you would know about server room, right? Data center means server room. So as you can see in the server room, we have uh, server hardware, we have switches, we have storage devices. So I believe you guys are familiar with compute. You are also familiar with storage, right? Sorry, because I'm using my mouse to write. And you would also be familiar with the network stuff. So this is the overview of the physical data center. So what is virtualization? So in virtualization, what we do basically on the hardware, we install uh, something called hypervisor, and then we create virtual machine on top of that. So what are we going to discuss today? Normally, you guys are familiar that if you have five physical machines, your laptop, your desktop, you can have a physical switch and you can connect your computer using cable, using Ethernet ports, RJ45 connector, twisted pair cable, and you assign IP addresses, and these machines can be able to communicate to each other, right? But what if you have virtual machines running on your hypervisor on the hardware? So how these virtual machines are going to communicate with each other and how those virtual machine can be accessed from the physical network and how those virtual machine can communicate outside the world like internet and other virtual machine running on the different hosts. So today's topic is favorably related to virtual networking, right? So as you can see here, this is uh, the VMware product called VMware vSphere. So vSphere is basically a product of this which is used for server virtualization. So um, in my previous sessions, I already talked about virtualization and the benefits of virtualization. And even if you visit my YouTube channel, you would find a lecture related to ESXi installation. You will also see a lecture related to vCenter server. So some of my lectures of the basic, which is prerequisite for this session, those are already available on my YouTube channel. So you can cover your concept from there and then you can watch this video again and then you can also cover this one. But hopefully in today's lecture, still I will try to explain the basic concepts of virtualization. So VMware vSphere is basically a VMware product and it consists of two components. One is called ESXi hypervisor, and the other one is called vCenter server, which is a management piece. What is the story of today's topic? The thing is that if we have virtual machine running on the hardware, on the hypervisor, how these virtual machines are going to communicate. So we will be discussing something called virtual switches, and those virtual machine will be connected to virtual switch, and then there will be uplink connected to that virtual switch, and the virtual machine would be able to communicate with each other, and even they should be able to communicate with the other virtual machine running on the other host. So that's what we are going to discuss in today's session. Okay, what is ESXi? So ESXi is a bare metal hypervisor which can be installed directly on the hardware, and you can see we have multiple virtual machines running here. Okay, is my voice not clear? I just received a message from Mr. Haji Zubair. So, am I audible to you guys?
Yes, sir, it's fine, sir.
Perfect. Thank you. So, I think Haji Zubair, you need to uh, uh, check your internet connectivity. Okay. So I think I'm running fast. The reason because we have to start the actual topic. So these are just the basic level things. So which is why I'm just running fast. As you can see here, uh, physical and virtual networking. Let's On the left side, you can see this is a physical machine. Like you have your, it could be your laptop, it could be your desktop, it could be your server. And there will be a Cisco switch. Uh, I'm also promoting Cisco technologies here because I have some Cisco people here. So I could also write Huawei or any other vendor switch, but they give me treat in the past, so which is why I'm just promoting their technology as well. So this is a Cisco switch. The computer will be connected here. Let's say we have another machine connected here. Let's say we have another machine. So this is the story of the physical machine, right? And we have a hardware, a server hardware on which we have installed hypervisor and we have some virtual machines running. So just keep in mind that when you install hypervisor on top of the hardware, there will be a switch created called vSwitch, virtual switch, right? And every virtual machine has a virtual network adapter, VNIC, right? Those VNIC will be connected to the virtual switch, and the physical adapter of this hardware will be connected to the virtual switch, and we call it uplink in that case. And then this adapter will be connected to the physical switch. So if virtual machine has to communicate with each other, they will be communicating through virtual switch, right? And every virtual machine will have its own virtual network adapter, right? And each virtual machine will have its own IP address, and this is how virtual machine communicate with each other. So before I move to next slide, do you guys have any question?
Hello.
Yes.
Is there any services need to run on vSphere for the vSwitch?
Uh, okay. Basically, when you install hypervisor, ESXi hypervisor on the hardware, by default,
Okay.
a virtual switch will be created, and that is called vSwitch 0.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we don't need to, the first switch will be created by default, but in today's lecture, we are going to learn how to create multiple virtual switches. We will also discuss the architecture of virtual switches, right? So that's
So
why
is there
I.
any,
Mhm.
sorry, sir, is there any option like as we have in physical switch there we have 8 port, 16 port, 24 port. Is there any like this in virtual switch that all there is also ports we have limited ports or there are no limited ports?
Hmm, it's a very good question. So Maksud has asked a question that in Cisco switch, like when you see here, let me open the browser here so that I can explain it. Normally, if you have a Cisco switch, right? So you would see a number of ports, right? We can see 48, 64, 128, maybe 16. So let's say we have this switch and we have around 1, 2, 3, 4, I think almost 64 ports, right? So it means that we can connect up to 64 machines to this switch, right? How about virtual switches? So I am I cannot recall that at the moment, but I believe it's more than 4,000 or maybe 3,000 virtual ports are available in a single virtual switch. So if you have like 1,000 virtual machines, that's fine. A single virtual switch should be able. Okay, thank you, Sandeep. So Sandeep just mentioned that 4,096. You got your answer, Mr. Maksud?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Perfect. Okay, any other question, guys, before we move to next slide?
Sir, can you explain the virtual architect again?
Okay, we have not started that yet. So no worries, we will discuss it. We were just talking about that if virtual machine has to communicate with each other, each virtual machine has a virtual network adapter, and those
Okay,
virtual
sir.
network adapter are going to be connect with uh, the which thing? The virtual switch, right?
Okay, sir.
Perfect. Give me 1 second. My lab is running crazy today. I don't know why. Maybe they have heard about you people that you guys are going to join my session. So yeah, finally I access my lab.
Is there an issue you are facing while connecting with the server?
No, no, no. Actually, I was having issue with the vCenter server, but finally I got access. No
All right.
worries. We do have options, a slot available for the lab, so we will discuss it. Okay, let's discuss this
All
slide.
right.
So virtual switches. Virtual switches allow virtual machine to connect to each other and to connect to the outside world, right? And the connection between a virtual machine and a virtual switch is similar to a connection between a computer's physical network adapter and a physical switch. So let's say we have this virtual machine, right? That virtual machine is connected here. There is another machine, right? And this is the virtual switch, right? And these are the physical adapter of the hardware. So this is my Dell server, for example, Dell server, and I have 4 physical adapter. They are connected here. And then those 4 adapters are attached to the virtual switch, and we can call it uplink, right? Uplinks. These are called uplinks. And I think in the physical network, when we connect a link which connects two physical switches, that is also called uplink, right? So here there is the same story. So a connection between a virtual switch and the physical switch is called uplink, right? And if we have to assign IP address to this one, we need a VM kernel port. So we have 2 types of port group. One is called virtual machine port group, and the other one is called VM kernel network adapters. And those are used for IP communication. So if we have to assign IP address, we will use VM kernel port group. And if we have to provide connectivity to the virtual machine, then we need something called virtual machine port group. And the reason we have green and purple color, because on this Dell server, we have virtual machine and those belongs to different VLANs. And I think in the physical switch, if you have a Cisco switch, and if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 physical machine, and those belongs to different VLAN, for example, VLAN 10, and these 4 virtual machine belongs to VLAN 20, then what you do, you access the switch, you create VLANs on the physical switch, and then you assign ports and interfaces to that VLAN, and that's how you separate physical machines from each other, right? On the virtual switches, if you have to create VLANs, we create different virtual machine port groups. So let's say this virtual machines is for VLAN 20, and this virtual machine port group is for VLAN 20 or 10, right? That is the story. So I hope you got some idea, and hopefully you will get more idea here in this diagram. So in this diagram, we can see a virtual switch. This is basically the overview of standard switches. So we have not started any option related to distributed switch right now. We are just talking about standard switches. So as you can see here, this is our physical switch, right? And we have a Dell servers or maybe HPE servers. They are connected to the switch, and each hardware or host has 3 physical network adapters. So adapter number 1, 2, and 3. And here we have the same configuration. On the ESXi host, this is my ESXi1 host. I can see a single virtual switch which has all the uplinks connected, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 ports, VM ports or port groups. These 2 port groups are VM kernel port groups because the one has my management IP address and the other one has my vMotion IP address, right? What is vMotion? So we do have topics coming. So inshallah in upcoming webinars, we will talk about vMotion as well. And we can see we have test environment. So these are the virtual machine on which our developers and some folks who are testing some applications. So those virtual machine are connected here. And we have a production port group in which has my production virtual machines. So I hope this diagram can explain everything, right? So you can ask me if you have any question in this diagram.
सर सर ये एक डायग्राम में हम कितने ये कंप्यूटर को हम कनेक्ट कर सकते हैं मतलब जो ये है ना ये स्विच वगैरह इसमें हम ये कितने कंप्यूटर्स को ये कनेक्ट कर सकते हैं
Okay, so your question is that how many virtual machines can be connected to a virtual switch? So as Sandeep already answered that we have maximum 4096 ports available on the virtual switch. So if you have normally on a single host, if we normally if we can run 100 virtual machine or maybe 150 virtual machine, but let's say you have a very powerful hardware and you have like 200 plus virtual machines running on a single hardware, so that's fine. You can have a virtual switch, right? And
सर इसमें से कौन सा जो है ये मशीन ये अच्छा होता है
so it depends on your workload. For example, you have to run databases, you have to run email services. So it depends. Like I'm not a server expert, but we do have Umair Siddiqui here. He can answer that question in the chat. Like it depends on the workload. So let's say if you have to run 10 virtual machines and each virtual machine has some high application. So based on that, your solution architect and other storage expert can design a solution for you and suggest your hardware.
Sir, please tell us, is there any scenario where we need multiple virtual switches?
Yes, exactly.
Like,
So we will discuss it during the lab portion.
thank you, sir.
No problem. Okay, so I have many questions. Guys, if you have question, you should ask. You should not send me a direct message. You should post it. You should send the questions to everyone. So let me answer some of the questions. Uh, I have a question from Mr. Sajad. If we switch some reason not working, then how can communicate? So basically, virtual switches are not physical switches. It's not like the power will be down and something like that, but we can have multiple switches and we can have multiple, we can attach multiple uplinks and we can uh, attach multiple uplinks to a single virtual switch, and we will discuss these things in the lab portion. Haris has a question that how many virtual switches are there in VMware? So we have standard switch and we have distributed switch in the VMware vSphere portion. And we do have a separate product that is called VMware NS6, right? This is more advanced networking training. Uh, It only covers the network virtualization sub. So we are not going to discuss this. Just we are focusing on the standard switches and distributed switches. Okay. Let's move forward and then we will come back to the questions again. So let's stay with this slide and let's explain it. So a virtual switch connect VMs to the physical network. Obviously, if these virtual machine has to communicate with the physical machines which are connected to the physical switch, so they can communicate like this, right? And the reason we have multiple uplinks to a single switch, and I think you guys are familiar with Ether channel, you guys are familiar with neck teaming. So same is the case here. So your virtual switch has multiple uplinks for redundancy purpose, for good speed, and that's the story. Okay. They provide connectivity between VMs on the same host or on different ESXi hosts. So those virtual machine can communicate on the same switch, and if they have to communicate with the other ESXi host virtual machine, they can communicate like this. And they also support VM kernel services. These are VM kernel services such as vSphere, vMotion migration, iSCSI management, IP storage, and all these stuff, right? So let's move forward. Where is my mouse? Okay. Types of virtual switch connections. So a virtual switch has specific connection types, VM ports, VM kernel ports, right, and uplink ports. And let's explain it here. In this diagram, we can see uh, multiple scenarios. Let's assume that this is my ESXi1, and let's assume that this is our ESXi2. We have two hosts, right? On ESXi1, we have created one virtual switch and we have attached uplinks, all the uplinks, 4 uplinks to the same switch. And then we created two VM kernel port groups and we created three VM kernel port group and two virtual machine port groups. And on the other ESXi host, we have created multiple virtual switches, right? And each virtual switch has two uplinks attached, and each virtual switch has a separate port groups created. So it's up to you people, right? It's up to you. If you want to keep it a single switch and you want to create all the port groups on the single switch, and you can separate the traffic on a single virtual switch as well. And you can also create multiple virtual switches. And Maksud also ask a question regarding why we need multiple virtual switches. So I will answer that question once we start the labs. But just try to understand this slide. And I will cover these both scenarios with you people. Because in our lab, if I show you my lab, let me go to my lab here. Oh, where is my, I need to remove this. And you can see here, I have three ESXi hosts here, ESXi1, I have ESXi2, and I have ESXi3, right? So, and if I go to virtual switches portion, there is a default switch called vSwitch 0, right? And we can see, let me maximize the font so that you can see this one. So as you can see here, this is one of our standard switch, right? This is the physical adapter. We also call it uplink, that is connected to your physical switch. And then on the virtual switch, we have a VM kernel port group. and that is the default virtual machine port group. So I think Anil, I answered your question. A VM kernel port group is a port group which we can use for IP communication. So it's like a layer 3. It has a layer 3 capability. We assign IP address to this VM kernel port group. So even if I have to access my host, I am communicating to the VM kernel port group. If I want to access this host, right? So I will write this IP address in the browser and I will have access of this ESXi host. And let me show you what is the IP address 192.168.19.251. So if I write 192.251, I can access my ESXi host. So actually we are communicating with the VM kernel port group, right? And I have this ESXi host. I can create virtual machine. So when I create a virtual machine, let me create a virtual machine here. For example, VM01 test. Okay, is my voice clear, guys? Jibamani just posted that my voice is not clear.
Not
It's
clear.
quite
Yes,
clear,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Perfect,
yes.
perfect. Okay, so let's create a virtual machine. So we are not here for the creation of virtual machine. This is just for the understanding purpose. So as you can see here, by default, I can see a VM network port group. This is a default port group. When I create this virtual machine, right? So when we create a virtual machine, by default, that virtual machine will be attached to, I can see here, this VM network. I can see VM01 test. I just created a virtual machine, right? This one. And this virtual machine is connected to VM network, which is a default virtual machine port group, right? So we can create multiple virtual machine port group. We can create multiple virtual switches. So today in the morning, I had a session with my students here locally. So I created a storage VM kernel port group. So let me delete this one so that I can give you an overview. So let me make it easy. I'm going to delete the switch, the other switch, because I want to keep it from the scratch. So I just deleted the uh, switch one. So by default, when you install the ESXi hypervisor, there will be a single switch, standard switch, vSwitch 0, and a single physical adapter will be attached. Even if you have multiple physical adapters available on the host, but still a single uplink will be connected to that virtual switch 0. And you would see one port group, which is VM network. That would be the default port group. So how many virtual machine you are creating, by default, it will be attached here, right? But
Sir,
since
I have a question.
Mhm.
In this actual scenario, these all three ESXi hosts are in fact virtual machines. Then where is the physical one? But how what how we connect physical? But there is no concept of physical adapter. In fact, these are our
Okay,
virtual machines.
no, let me tell you. You should only focus here on this dashboard. This
Okay.
is my nested lab, right? So don't put yourself in a trouble right now. Just assume that these are the actual Dell servers or HPE server, which has four physical adapters: VMNIC 0, VMNIC 1, VMNIC 2, and 3.
Sir, mm,
Mhm.
sir, how I can create a virtual switch?
So that's what we are going to discuss today.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any question in this slide, guys? Okay. This is a very important uh, slide, right? If you have, let me create another virtual machine here, and let me give you an overview. VM02-test. Let's say I am going to create this virtual machine, and I need to install Windows 10 32-bit, for example. And let me change the storage option. By default, I can see this virtual machine is also connected to the VM network because we have a single virtual machine port group. So by default, all the virtual machines are going to connect with the same virtual machine port group, and that is this one, right? What if this VM1 belongs to VLAN 10 and this VM2 belongs to VLAN 20? So if those both virtual machines are connected to the same virtual machine port group, that's not gonna work. We are going to create another virtual machine port group, and we will keep the VLAN ID VLAN 10. Then we will create another virtual machine port group, and we will assign VLAN 20 here. Then we will remove these two virtual machine from, we will disconnect these virtual machine from this port group, and we will attach VM1 to this one, right? Let me change the color. So VM will be connected here, and then VM2 will be connected to this one, right? So these two virtual machines. So on a single host, on a same host, both virtual machine will not be able to communicate to each other. Just like the way you have a physical switch, and when you create multiple VLANs on a switch, on the same switch, those machines are not able to communicate with each other. If you want to do communication between different VLANs, so you can have Donald to answer this question. You can have Sir Jalal. He is also, I think, here if he has not left yet. So they can answer you because they are a Cisco expert. Yes, sir. Yes, definitely, Sajad. Enter VLANs routing. Exactly, Umair Sadiq, you are right. Right? So let's discuss this diagram again. So in this diagram, they have a single host, right? And it has a virtual switch, but on the virtual switch, they created two virtual machine port group, and we have VM1 and 2. VM1 is connected to the port group, which is for VLAN 105, and VM2 is connected to a port group which is for VLAN 106. So on the same host, they both should not be able to communicate. This physical NIC will be connected to a trunk port because on this physical adapter, both VLAN 105 and 106 traffic should pass, right? Should be forwarded. And if these two virtual machine has to communicate, the physical switch will be connected to a router. For example, this is, let's say, a Cisco router. Here we will configure enter VLAN routing. So if even on the same host, if this virtual machine wants to communicate with this one, so it will be like this, right? Enter VLAN routing, and this is how it will communicate. So again, you have to contact your network team for the enter VLAN routing. But if you don't like to communicate with the network team, then VMware has a solution called VMware NS6. So it's not a part of today's lecture, So inshallah, some other time we will also discuss what is NS6 and how NS6 can can do your routing stuff and all the other security stuff and all these stuff. So NS6 has a built-in firewall feature. It has a built-in routing capability available. So you don't need to contact your physical team, right? Physical network team. I think it should be clear right now, right? Any question? Silence is the best answer. Okay. And even if I miss your questions, guys, so we do have a session at the end. We will discuss that. Yes, NS6 has a load balancing capability also available, Mr. Omer Siddiqui. Okay. And I already showed you the view of standard switch, and this is my lab. And as you can see, I have 3 hosts, and I have on my ESXi host, I can see a virtual switch vSwitch 0, which has a default management VM kernel adapter and a virtual machine port group, which is the default one, right? So that is the overview of standard switch. Now we have a lab portion. So before I start the lab, do you have any question, guys? Any question? Do you want me to answer? Abdullah has a question that how I create the IP address. Mr. Abdullah, it's a very challenging question, you know. You put me in a very different situation. I'm going to pause the recording for a while. So, what is our task today, right? Let me draw a diagram because I am a whiteboard person. So, let's say you have a physical switch, right? This is my physical switch. It could be any technology, right? Okay. And I have a server hardware, right? And on I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 physical adapter, right? That is the story. And and on top of this, we have ESXi hypervisor installed, right? And as we discussed that by default, a vSwitch is created and that is called vSwitch 0, right? And one of the physical adapter will be automatically connected to that virtual switch and that is called uplink, right? And we also discussed that by default there will be a virtual machine port group and there will be another port group that is which one? VM kernel port group, right? And we also discussed that when we create a virtual machine, right, each virtual machine has a virtual network adapter and that virtual machine will be connected to the virtual machine port group. And I think we discussed these options in the theoretical portion. So this is not a good practice that your virtual switch has a single uplink. What if there is some issue with the cable. It means that all the virtual machine will lost communication to the outside world. And let's say if we have some critical applications running on those virtual machines, so we would not be able to communicate with those application because the uplink connected to the virtual switch, it's not working. So the first lab we are going to perform today to how to add uplink to existing virtual switch. So we do have adapters available. The only thing we need to do is this thing. This is our job. That is the first step we are going to perform. So as you can see here, this is my lab. We have ESXi 251. Let me access it directly without vCenter server. So, and then I will access the host from vCenter server. So let's do this way. Let's say you have a single ESXi host and you have accessed that host without vCenter server. And when you go to networking portion, right, and I can see by default switch is vSwitch 0. And this is the topology of the virtual switch. And we are also getting a message that the virtual switch has no uplink redundancy. So first we need to confirm how many physical adapters are available. So I can see here on my host, on my server, I have 4 adapters available. If you need more than 4, then I believe you guys must be familiar. If not, you can Google it. Let's say you have a Dell hardware, you can ask your Dell vendor to give you the another cards or slots and that you can attach to your server hardware, and that's how you can add more uplink as well. So currently we have only 4 physical adapters available. Majid, I think it also answer your question. So the easiest way is just click on your virtual switch, and here I can see add uplink. When you click add uplink, you can see by default uplink 2 is visible here. You can add more 3. If I am trying to add fifth one, I'm getting a message. There are no free physical adapter available because our server hardware has only 4 adapter. Uplink 1 is already connected, which is VMNext 0. So I'm going to remove these 2. So I just added another adapter and I just save it, right? And now I can also confirm it from here. I have 2 physical adapters connected to vSwitch 0. This is one step, one method we have done, and we just added another uplink. Let's do the same task for 252 host. This is my another host. I have physical adapters 4 available. One of them is already connected to vSwitch 0. We are going to connect VMNeck 1. But now this time we are using a vCenter vSphere client dashboard. So log into your vCenter server and select the host, right? Go to virtual switch. And here you have option called manage physical adapters, right? And then you can select the uplink and you can move that uplink to the active adapters and you can click OK. And now I can see I have 2 physical adapters connected to my virtual switch 0. This is the second method, right? And Daminda is here and he just reminded me something that I should also perform a lab that how we can add another uplink using command line. So thank you, Daminda. So let's access our host. Let's do the same step using command line interface. So if you are a CLI lovers, right? The first thing is you need to enable SSH. So where is SSH services? By default, SSH service is stop. You can see here. So let me start the SSH service. So we are showing here the SSH option is now started. Then the favorite tool you have is this one. All the Cisco guys must be familiar. You can write the ESXi host IP address, or maybe you can write the fqdn 253.kbit.local. You can log into your host, right? And this is your host. Anil is saying that he's not able to see the font, so let me change the font size. So I just log into my ESXi host. So we are going to perform the same task but using command line interface. So root, and I just log into my ESXi host. So before we write the command, we need some information to confirm, right? So let me confirm those information. Okay, the first thing we need to confirm the switch name. So what is the switch name? vSwitch 0. So open a notepad, right? And what is our switch name? That is vSwitch 0. Make sure the S is capital, right? vSwitch 0. The other thing we need to confirm the physical adapter name, that is VMNIC1. This adapter we are going to connect. So you should also write this thing on a side note. So these two names we need to give in the command, right? So let's start with the command. So the command is ESXCLI space network vSwitch, right? Standard uplink add uplink dash name. What is the name of the uplink? VMNIC1 space vSwitch dash name is equal to vSwitch 0. The S is capital because this is a case sensitive. Once you click enter, and now from here you can confirm that I have now VMNIC1 attached to my vSwitch 0. So we just perform the first task using 3 different methods. You can access your host directly using VMware host client. You can access your host using vSphere client if their host is connected to vCenter server, or you can access your host using your favorite putty, or what do you call it? And you can log into your host using SSH. Once you are done, make sure to disable SSH because SSH is very danger. If you are not using any services and that port is open, that is not good. So I just stopped the SSH again. Any question in the first lab we just performed, adding uplink to existing virtual switch. So this is done. No question so far? Amit, Amit, are you with us?
So can we see the command again, please?
Yes. Do you have almonds?
No, sir, not right now.
That's why you are asking me. Let me write the command here actually. I just copied that command. And where is the Word document? Sorry. Where is the Word document? This one. Are you able to see now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Donald just messaged me that send us the command in the chat box. So Donald, here you go. I just post the command in the chat box, guys.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, Raja. Welcome.
You know, if you just in the same command, if you just add instead of add, you remove, it will also remove. I did that one before.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have never done that. Thank you,
You're
Raja.
welcome.
Let's do that, actually. First of all, let's start the SSH service again. And let's log into the host. Where is my host? Okay, Putty. Mhm. Perfect. I want to move back to command word. Okay, what is the command, Mr. Raja? The option is ESX CLI, right? Network vSwitch standard uplink remove. Uplink dash name is equal to vmnic1 vSwitch dash name is equal to vSwitch 0. Raja, thank you so much.
You're most welcome. I was just trying before, and I thought, how can I remove this one? It did work, so that's what I was saying to you.
Okay, perfect. You deserve a treat, but unfortunately you are very far.
No, your appreciation is a big deal. I mean, that's the main thing for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Raja is in Canada, I believe, right?
Yes,
Okay. Raja is in Canada. I think you can the same command, but just write instead of add, you can put remove. Okay. Okay, guys. I think we are done with the first lab, right? We have a question from Farhad, so we'll discuss that, Farhad. But let's focus with the lab. Creation of virtual machine port group for a standard switch. Let's say you receive a message from your management and they want you to create another port group on the same switch, right? And they want you to assign to put the VLAN 10 ID for that port group, and they want you to connect a virtual machine, right, to this port group. This is the story. Okay, or maybe the requirement is that you have ESXi, this one, sorry, VM02, right? This is the VM02. By default, these two virtual machines are connected to VM network. So they want you to create another port group on this switch and give it a name, for example, production, and then connect VMnet2 to production port group. So first, understand the scenario. creation of virtual machine port group for a standard switch. So let's do that. We are on the vCenter server view, vSphere client, select the host, go to configure tab, virtual switch, and here next to on the virtual switch 0, we have option add networking, right? We got three options. Do you want to create a VM kernel adapter? Nope. Do you want to attach another physical adapter or uplink? Nope. We are going to create a virtual machine port group. So select this one, click next. Do you want to create another standard switch? Nope. We want to use the same switch on the same switch, right? And you can click next, give it a name, for example, production, and let's say the VLAN ID is 10. And you can click next and finish. Finally, we have created a virtual machine port group with the name of production, and we have VLAN ID 10. Okay, but VM02 is still connected to VM network. So on the virtual machine, you need to right click, you need to click edit settings. From here, next to network adapter, you can browse and you should see a production port group, and you can click OK, and you can click OK. And finally, from here, you can confirm that VMnet VM0, VM2 is connected to production port group, and VM1 is connected to the default virtual machine port group. So I know uh, who has a question? Yes, Umair Sadiqi has a question. I was expecting a question from some of you, but thanks to Umair that he asked first. What if we have 100 virtual machines and we need to remove them from one virtual machine port group and connect them to the other virtual machine port group? What's we are gonna do? So with the standard switches, you have to do this method. But with vSphere distributed switch, right, in a single click, you can migrate 100 virtual machines from one virtual machine port group to another virtual machine port group. Does it make sense? Perfect. Okay, another story. When you create a virtual machine port group on on one host, the same configuration must be performed on the other ESXi host as well, because what if we have to move VMnet2 to another host in the future? So we need to have a same network configuration available for that virtual machine, because VM are guest, and you know guest, they are not permanently on a single host, right? If they are getting good resources from the other host, they will be migrated. How it will be migrated? Using manually or through vSphere DRS feature, which is distributed resource scheduler. That is another topic. So whatever you do on one switch, on one host, you have to do it on all the host. And which is why we recommend vSphere distributed switch to our customers if they have a big environment and if they have many hosts and they have multiple VLANs and they have multiple virtual machine, then we suggest to uh, to use vSphere distributed switch. And vSphere distributed switch is not, it is a expensive feature. You need to have a vSphere Enterprise Plus license. We will discuss that when we start the distributed switch portion, right? But I'm just making your mind that prepare yourself for distributed switch topic. Okay.
Sir, are we covering DHCP portion in this?
Uh,
DHCP is totally alike, totally different.
Totally different. We are not here to discuss any DHCP thing here. We are just covering the vSphere distributed switch and vSphere standard switch.
Then how
And
IP will be assigned? Where how IP will be assigned to these network VMs?
it's a good question. What if you have a DHCP server connected to your physical network, right? That DHCP is here. This could be your Windows server, this could be your Cisco router, this could be your firewall, right? So these virtual machine will get an IP
This
address
could
from.
be also a virtual machine, sir. This could be also a virtual machine.
Yes, okay. So you are a fan of virtual machine, so I'm just giving you an idea. So yes, let's say you have this virtual machine, you have server operating system and DHCP running here. You got it? Uh, there is
Yes,
no
sir.
bridge concept. This is the uplink are basically these uplinks will be like these ports will be trunk, trunk. And I have a Cisco instructor here as well. I invited him because he promised me that he is going to give me a big treat. So I'm making students for him as well. So if you don't know about VLANs and IP addressing and all these stuff, so I have two instructor here in my session today, and they can teach you Cisco. And I don't know if they will teach you free or maybe they will charge you. I'm just kidding, by the way. Are you getting the point now, guys? Okay. Yes, Gulfam. Muhammad Gulfam, I am recording the lecture and I will be uploading this to my YouTube channel. This is my channel name. You can search it. Okay. So I think we are done with this lab as well. Creation of virtual machine port group, right? Any question, guys?
Sir,
Mhm.
sir, how I can create a IP address?
Abdullah, you
Yes,
should
sir.
meet me on Monday in
Okay, sir.
university, right?
Okay, sir.
But remember that you should have some almonds and some juices as well so that my mind is clear so that I
Okay,
can
sir.
explain it very well, right?
Okay, sir.
On Monday, I'm going to skip my breakfast here.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any question, guys? Before we move to the next task, which is creation of VM kernel network adapter.
Kashif, can you please explain the functionality of host profiles as well?
No,
Like if
okay, okay, it's not related to today's topic, but if we get some time after the session, that might be we discuss that.
all right, okay.
Yep, thank you. Any other question, guys? Today, only the Pakistani guys are speaking, and all the Indian and the other countries people are very silent today. So I want them to participate in this session. Anil, you used to be a very talkative person.
Yes, but today my concept are getting clear.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, guys. So let's do this thing. Let's say uh, we are going to create another port, which is a VM kernel port group. And the reason we are going to create a VM kernel port group is because this port group is for my management traffic, right? But I need another port group for my vMotion traffic or maybe for my storage or maybe I need multiple redundant management port group, right? So let's do one thing. Why we need multiple VM kernel port group? And for storage communication, for vMotion. What is vMotion? That is a feature which migrate a powered on virtual machine from one host to another host. So let's do one thing. As you can see here, we have three hosts, ES6i1, 2, and 3. When I click the first one, when I go to configure tab, I can see VM kernel adapters. And by default, we have a single VM kernel adapter, which is for my management network. And the IP address assigned to that is 192.168.19.251. So let's say my storage team told me that we need to have a VM kernel port group for my storage communication, and they also given me a network range, let's say 172.20.0.0/16, and they also mentioned that ES6i1 IP should be like this one, 20.0.251. They also mentioned the IP address of the other host, and the third host IP is this one. So we received these information from our team, and now as a vSphere administrator, we have to create VM kernel port group on each ESXi host, right? And we need to do that. So the best practice is to create a separate virtual switch. So what we are going to do now, we are going to, let me just show you here. We are going to create another switch, vSwitch 1, for example, on each host, right? And we are going to connect VMNIC 2, the third, this one, right? And then on vSwitch 1, we are going to create a VM kernel port group for storage, and we are going to assign IP address in this format. So let's do that. So let's start with ES6i1. Currently we have vSwitch 0. Let's ignore this. And we can also see that we have uplinks available. VMNIC 2 and 3 are still available. So what I can do, I can create another switch. So I can click here. What is your use case? And our use case is to create VM kernel network adapter. So we select this, the first option, and we can also check the details that why we need a VM kernel port group, right? We can click next. Do you want to use existing switch? Nope. I want to create a new standard switch. Do you want to change the maximum transmission unit? By default, it's 1500. If you have a use case or requirements of jumbo frames, you can change this value. But remember, when you change this value, it needs to be changed on the physical switches as well, right? So let's assume that we don't know MTU size. Let's keep it as it is. Click next.
What's the maximum? Sorry, sir.
Mhm.
What's the maximum MTU supported by the
Donor,
VMware?
Donor,
Yes, sir.
you should
Yes.
answer me this question. What is the
Because I have
max?
a challenge. I know it's 9,000. We want more than
Yes,
that, but I'm
yes.
not able to get more than 9,000. Why, sir?
The reason your physical switches does not support more than 9,000. So even if we put some another value, it's not gonna work because we need to keep it same, right? So
Yeah.
but-
Okay.
so the answer is 9,000. Okay, so let's move forward. Uh, do you want to attach VM kernel, sorry, uplink? Yes, definitely. So select check VMNIC 2 will be attached. You can click next. What should be the name of that VM kernel port group? So storage network. Do you want to set a VLAN ID? If it is required, you should put it, right? What is this thing? By default, you can see a TCP IP stack is default. It means that I can use the same VM kernel port group for different services. So I can enable multiple services and the same VM kernel port group will be used for all. Especially when we are creating a VM kernel port group for vMotion, we recommend to select the vMotion TCP IP stack. Once you select that, only vMotion traffic will be forward on this VM kernel port group. So for better performance of vMotion, we select this one. So it's not a part of today's session. So let's stick with the default option. We don't need to check any services. We just need a VM kernel port group to assign IP address. You can click next and you can assign an IP address. Let's say 20.0.251. And this is the default subnet mask. And click next and finish. Finally, we have created a vSwitch 1 and we assign this what we say IP address as well. Okay, let's do the same thing for ES6i2 as well. VM kernel network adapter. Next, new standard switch, VMNIC 2, and storage network. Next, 172.20.0.252. So, and click finish. So Donald just sent me a message that he wants to use the same switch, right, for storage. He wants to create a VM kernel port group on the same switch. So yes, that is something we can do. How we can do that? Let's do this way. Add networking, VM kernel adapter on the same switch, new standard switch, VMNIC 2 will be attached. Okay, sorry. I should not select the same switch. Select an existing standard switch, right? Give it a name. Storage network 172.20.0.253. That's it. And finish. So on the same vSwitch 0, we have a storage VM kernel port group, but there is an issue. What is that issue? You know, when you click here, this one, we are showing that this management port group, right, has which adapter bind VMNIC 0. And when I click here on this IP address, why is my lab not working? Am I audible to you guys?
Yes, sir,
Yes,
audible,
sir.
audible to us.
Yes, I lost connection to my server. Okay, so guys, is sorry for the disturbance because we lost the access to the lab. So our lab is still coming back. So in the meantime, we will start our next portion. This is the last portion of this today's session. That is vSphere distributed switch. So what is distributed switch? A distributed switch functions as a single virtual switch across all associated hosts. Currently, so far, we covered this portion. Like we have 3 hosts, and each host has a switch called standard switch, right? So let's say if we have to create virtual machine port group on this switch, we would have to create here as well. Then again, the same configuration here and same configuration here. What if we receive an email from our management that we need 5 virtual machine port group, right? So if we don't have a distributed switch, the story will be like on same host, sorry, on each host, we will have to create virtual machine port group here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the same configuration will be repeated on all the ESXi host. Does it make sense? So the same configuration will be performed there. What if we have 100 virtual machines and we have to connect 20 VMs to each virtual machine port group? So on each virtual machine, we will have to right click and we will have to connect like this. So this is also a difficult task, right? So what we can do, we have another option called distributed virtual switch, right? We can create a distributed switch on vCenter server level. Then we can attach all our ESXi host to distributed switch. And on distributed switch, we will create 5 port groups. We don't need to create all the port groups on each host because once whatever we do on distributed switch, it will be available. The setting and configuration will be available on each ESXi host connected to that distributed switch. Does it make sense? So it's like a single dashboard, right? So that is the function of distributed switch. And this is the overview of the distributed switch. Let's discuss the architecture. We have 2 hosts in our environment, right? Each host has 3 physical adapters, right? And this is our vCenter server. On vCenter server, we have created distributed switch. Then we connected all the hosts, the 2 hosts to distributed switch. So which is why we are showing total 6 physical adapters or uplink on the distributed switch because each host has 3 uplinks and they are connected now to the distributed switch. And then we have something called distributed port groups. We are showing these things. So that's how it works. So we will explore the distributed switch in the lab in detail. I will show you, but try to understand this slide, right? Any question here? Let me see in the meantime if my lab is available, right? So that we can access the lab. I think our lab is still in the progress. We need to wait for it. Okay, let me move forward. Okay, this is the interface or overview of distributed switch. We can see On this is the vCenter server view. We have a network option. On the data center, we have created a distributed switch, and I think we have connected two ESXi host, or no, three ESXi host, I believe. 1, 2, 3. They are connected to the distributed. So if we have to create port group, we don't need to create port groups on each host. We will create a port groups here like this. And distributed switch has more features than standard switches, right? What is the prerequisite of distributed switch? All the ESXi host must be connected to vCenter server, and distributed switch can be created when you have logged into vCenter server. And we also need a vSphere Enterprise Plus license. So this feature is very expensive, right? So that is the story. And these are the tasks which we are going to complete in today's session for the distributed switch. The first thing, we will learn how to create distributed switch. The second thing, how to add ESXi host to the distributed switch. The third one, how to create port groups on distributed switch, how to attach or migrate VMs to distributed switch, and how to create or migrate VM kernel network adapters on virtual vSphere distributed switch. Sorry. Let's see if our host is available. So, okay, in the meantime, I will go back to this slide, and I will try to explain it. Let me open this thing. So let's say you have ESXi1, this one, right? And we have another ESXi host, and we have another ESXi host, right? So we have three ESXi hosts. They are connected to a physical switch, right? And they have, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4 uplinks. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Okay. And what we are going to do now, let's say two uplinks are already attached to standard switch, right? Each host has standard switch. So what we are going to do now, we are going to use the two port groups. So the thing is, the first task we are going to perform is to create a distributed switch. This will be a distributed switch. So we are going to create this switch, right? This will be the first objective. During creation of distributed switch, we will mention that we need two uplinks from each host, right? So two uplinks from each host we are going to use, right? You can attach more, but in our scenario, we are going to attach two uplinks from each host. So once you connect all the three hosts, right, the distributed switch, there will be a port group created here that is called uplink port group, right? Uplink port group. here. So how many port groups you will be showing? You will be showing 6 port groups. The reason 6 uplinks, the reason we have 3 ESXi hosts connected, and from each host we have 2 uplinks connected. And then on the distributed switch, we will create port groups here and here like this. Okay, there is no such option like VM kernel and virtual machine port group. We simply call it distributed port group, and you can use the same port group for VM kernel communication and virtual machine communication. So standard switch has how many components? 3 components. VM port group, VM kernel port group, and uplink. But distributed switch consists of 2 components, uplink port group and distributed port group. And the same distributed port group can be used for VM kernel communication, and it can be used for virtual machine communication. So there is a difference. You should know the difference, right? Let's see if our vCenter is available now. Let me back to login. Hopefully we should be able to access our vCenter now. Right? Finally, we have access. So guys, I just need 10 minutes more because of the lab issue. We are running 10 minutes late, so stay with me. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to delete the switch we just created. I want to make it back again. So let me delete it, this one. So I just remove vSwitch 1. Let me remove vSwitch 1 from this one. Let's assume that we have a new environment, right? Because I wanted to make it easy. Let me delete production port group as well, right? Let me change the network setting of the virtual machine, and I'm going to connect that virtual machine back to VM network, which is the default virtual machine port group. Let me delete production port group from here as well, right? And let me delete the production port group from this one as well. So as you can see, this is our fresh environment now. We have how many ESXi hosts? We have 3 hosts. Each host has a single standard switch vSwitch 0. We have a default port group, VM kernel port group and management, and 2 uplinks are attached. 2 uplinks are attached to vSwitch 0 and 2 uplinks are attached. And we have 2 free uplinks available, VMNIC2 and VMNIC3. VMNIC2 and VMNIC3 and VMNIC2 and VMNIC3. We do have a license available because this is our trial version. So if you want to practice on distributed switch, that's for 60 days you can have a free lab, or maybe you can access a VMware HL. You can watch my ESXi lecture and you will see those. So let's start with the creation. So if you have to create distributed switch, right, the first thing you need to log into vCenter server, and on the data center you can right click and you can click distributed switch, new distributed switch. Give it a name. I can give it a name, let's say VDS dash let's say batch 32, because I have my online session going on, so I can say batch 32 VDS. Click next. You can select the distributed switch version. Since all of our hosts are ESXi8, so in our case, we can select this one. But if you have 5 ESXi hosts and one of them is ESXi7, then you might need to select other option if you want them to be connected to the same distributed switch. So the higher version of distributed switch will have more features, and you can confirm these features from here, right? As you can see here, distributed switch version 8 has also a support of network offloads. So do not ask me what is network offloads. Do not ask me what is LACP because I am not a Cisco trainer, but these are the features which are available in the distributed switch, right? You can click next. How many number of uplinks you want from each host? So I want 2 because in our case, we have 2 uplinks available on each host. Okay, what if you have 4 4 uplinks available from each host? You can still select 4, but what will happen? Those uplinks will be removed or disconnect from the standard switches and will be connected to the distributed switch. So we are trying to make it simple now, which is why I'm selecting 2. Do we want to create a default port group? Nope. Do you want to enable the network IO control? By default, it is enabled. Let's keep it as it is. And let's click next. And finally, we have created a distributed switch and we are showing uplink port group as discussed in the diagram I just explained, this one. So this is created. But currently, if I click the distributed switch and I go to topology of the distributed switch, I don't see any ESXi host, any virtual machines because this switch does not have any ESXi host attached. So we just finished what is the lab? This one, creation of vSphere distributed switch. Now we are going to attach ESXi host, add ESXi. You can right click on the distributed switch which we just created. We have option called add and manage host. Here you can select add host. You can select all the host, right? How many? Okay, manage physical adapters, right? So VMNIC 0 and VMNIC 1 from each host is already attached to standard switches, but we still have VMNIC 2 and 3 available on each host. So if all the host has same number of uplinks available, then you can simply select one. So what I did actually, VMNIC 2 from each host will be considered as uplink 1. VMNIC 3 from each host will be considered as uplink 2. What if you have VMNIC 4 available on one of the hosts? Then you might need to go for this option, right? But let's move forward. Do you want to manage VM kernel adapter? No, we are not going to cover that portion right now because this is another step. We don't need to migrate VM. We just wanted to add ESXi host to distributed switch, and now we are showing 3 ESXi host, right? Those are connected to the distributed switch now. Now the real story begins. Creation of port group. Before distributed switch, if we had to create a port group on standard switch, we would click on each host individually and we would create a port group here. But now no need to create port groups on individual ESXi host. You can right click on distributed switch here You can click distributed port group. You can click new distributed port group, right? You can give it a name, for example, VDS underscore production. You can click next. Do you want to assign a VLAN ID? Do you want to, we are not going to touch these options right now. We will discuss these options. If there is a VLAN ID, so you can click VLAN, you can specify VLAN 10, for example, you can click next and finish, and that's it. So if we have 10 virtual machines, right, as we can see here, we have virtual machines here, right? Let's say we have a virtual machine on VM03-test. Let me create a VM on ES6i2, right? So I have another virtual machine here. Let's say I have another virtual machine on VM04-test. So I have virtual machine on different host, right? But by default, right? By default, these virtual machines are connected to VM network, which is connected to the standard switch, right? I want them to move to the distributed switch, right? So method number one, you can right click on the virtual machine. You can click edit settings. You can next to network adapter, you can browse and you can select VDS production, and one by one you can click on each virtual machine. And I know this is not a good practice and this is not what you want. We want all the virtual machine to migrate in a single click because now we have distributed switch. So how we are going to do that? We can right click on distributed switch. We can click add and manage host, right? Then we can click manage host networking, right? We can click next, select all the host and click next. Do you want to change anything in physical adapter? No. Do you want some setting in the VM kernel adapter? No. But we want to migrate virtual machine. Then you can check this button and you can click configure per virtual machine. And now we are showing all the virtual machine. It's up to you which port you want to assign. You want to assign this port group. You can do like this, right? This is how you can do that. Are we okay? When you click next and finish, what's gonna happen? All the virtual machine are going to move from standard switch to distributed switch, right? And this is how you can do that. And you can confirm it here as well from the production port group when you click VM. Even on this host, you can see we have distributed switch and we can see production and we can see virtual machine. ES6i2 has same, ES6i3 has same. Are we good? Okay, I have a question from Mr. Anil Kumar. And the question is migration from standard to distributed switch won't disturb connectivity of production VM? Yes, it's not going to affect because before migration, we will do our homework. We will be prepared, right? Like the VLAN configuration and all these stuff. So make sure you have all the homework you have done already. So we just finish this thing. Let me create another port group. Let me show you, because okay, let me create another, sorry. Right click, distributed port group, new distributed port group. For example, VDS underscore and test and development port group. I can click next. Let's say the VLAN ID is 20 and finish. Now I have another port group. Okay, the scenario is that we need to move all the virtual machines from production to test group. You can also right click on the production port group. You can click migrate VMs to another network. You can select test development. You can click next, select all the VMs and click next and finish. In a single step, you can see all the virtual machines are migrated. So that's the beauty of distributed switch. And guys, let me tell you, the topics which I'm covering right now, that's only the 5% of distributed switch I'm covering right now. Distributed switch has many other good features, right? Okay, what if I have multiple VLANs VMware running? Okay, on the production, you can have, okay, let me tell you, Mr. Anil, for each VLAN, we have to create another port group. That you should keep in mind. If all the virtual machine are connected to same port group, it means they all are belongs to same VLAN. Let's say 1 and 2 belongs to production, the other VLAN. Right click, migrate VM, select production, click next, select 1 and 2 VM only, and finish. That's it. We just moved VM 1 and 2 to production. That's how it's gonna work. Are we okay? Any question? Perfect. What is our next task? Attach or migrate. Okay, we have already done that. The last portion we are going to cover right now. Creation or migration of VM kernel network adapter. Step number 1. Let's say we have a scenario. They want us to create a VM kernel port group for storage. So you don't need to create port groups on each host. You can simply right click on distributed switch, right? You can click new distributed port group. You can give it a name, VDS underscore storage. Next, let's say next and finish. We have created a storage port group. Now, I want to use this port group for my VM kernel communication. So you can right click on this port group and you can click add VM kernel adapter. You can select all the hosts. Let's keep it simple as it is default. IP address of the first host will be 172.20.0.251. 252. We are getting suggestion as well. 253 and click next, next and finish. And now on each ESXi host, I can see a storage VM kernel port group. That is the beauty, right? See, I can see this. Okay, one more thing. Let me create a VM kernel port group here. a VM kernel port group. And let me use existing switch, standard switch. And let's say the port group name is vMotion network, vMotion. And the IP address is 10.0.0.251, right? I'm coming to that point. So we created a VM kernel port group here, vMotion. We created a vMotion port group here, add networking, VM kernel. So it is very difficult. See, guys, we are doing everything on each host separately, and it's a difficult task. But let's do that. I'm just trying to clear something to you guys, since you all are here till now. So let's do that. And let's create another vMotion, add networking, VM kernel port group, existing switch. So vMotion, and let me move forward 10.0.0.253. Okay. What if we have a scenario that each host already has a VM kernel adapter for vMotion? See, but that is on the standard switch. And they want you to migrate a vMotion, right? Port group, VM kernel port group from standard to distributed. So the first thing we need to create a port group on distributed switch, give it a name VDS underscore vMotion, and click finish. So we have a vMotion port group on distributed switch. If you don't have a vMotion existing, currently not available, you can simply right click and you can click add VM kernel, but we already have VM kernel port groups available on standard switches. So in that case, you will right click on the distributed switch, you will click add and manage host, you will click manage host networking, you will select all the host, and then we are not doing any changes on the physical, that's fine, but we are doing changes in the VM kernel adapter. First, we need to confirm which one is the vMotion. So VMK2 is the vMotion. So I can click assign port and I can assign vMotion port group. And when I click next and I can click next and finish, I can see from all the ESXi host, the vMotion port group is moved to the distributed switch now. So we can also do this thing as well. Any question, guys? So we have almost done with the creation or migration of vMotion. And if you want to connect with me, the first thing you need to follow my TikTok, because now I became a TikToker. And then you have all these information and you can connect with me if you have any question or if you are looking for some other thing. So I'm open to this.
सर आसिम बोल रहा हूँ
Let me save the recording first.